Housewife with a Half-Life by A.B. Wells. This is an extract from Chapter 2, where Susan finds out what it means to be a housewife with a half-life. "You said you're here to look after me," Susan says as he lowered his teacup. "But that's my job, looking after everyone else. Why do I need looking after?" "There's been some trouble, an anomaly. You might not even be aware of it," said the fairy godfather. "You're stuck in a relativity and you can't get out of it." Susan nodded. She'd always had an inkling, and now that he'd put his finger on it, it kind of made sense. "You've noticed then?" He paused. "You've heard of the Schrödinger cat experiment?" "Of course! Experimental physics is my hobby. It's an idea used to explain quantum mechanics. A cat is closed into a box with a radioactive element. At the moment a particle decays, some poison is released and kills the cat. But it's impossible to predict when it will happen, so no one can be sure if the cat is alive or dead without looking." "That's as close as clear as you're going to get," said the fairy godfather. "What we needed to do was look into your box, so to speak." "You just thought you'd pop in and check. Well, you can see I'm perfectly fine. Things couldn't be better. I have 2.5 children," she said, patting her belly. "Well, 2 children and half a mind to have another. A 4-bedroom, semi-detached home in a lovely, well-manicured estate. I even have a washer-dryer." "Yes," he said gloomily. "I was going to warn you about that." Susan smiled. "I'm beginning to get the idea you worry too much. Perhaps you'd like to read one of the self-help books I have on thought-stopping. They're ever so good. You can't let your life be stymied by fear, you know. And, by the way, you have a little bit of jam on the end of your nose." "The trouble is," said the fairy godfather, wiping his nose, "that while you are caught in this relativity, we think that you are breaking down." "What do you mean?" "We're not sure exactly how it happened, but we think that throughout your lifetime, as you've travelled through time and space, you've left elements of yourself behind in other dimensions. Your physical substance is disintegrating in sympathy. You're a housewife with a half-life. The half-life is how long it's going to take you to disintegrate by half. I'm sure you've heard it said before, I'm not half the man I used to be." "Yes, but I've never heard it in relation to a woman." "That's the problem. It's very rare. It's not commonly known, but women are what's keeping the universal fabric together. All that multitasking and intuition, they are constantly weaving threads. We think that you're the knot that's keeping everything together, but now the knot is fraying and—" He swept his hand across his brow melodramatically. "And if we don't sort you out—" "What?" she said, putting her cup back into the saucer. "Universal devastation?" The fairy godfather frowned. "Have you noticed anything unusual yourself?" "Well, yes," she said. "I do seem to be stuck in a rut. Sometimes I wonder if there's really anything outside the 4 walls of this house. I seem to be doing the same thing over and over again, and all the days blend into one another." The fairy entity had taken out a notebook and was writing in it with a stubby pencil. He nodded for her to continue. "It looks like we're right, then. You're stuck in a temporal prison. That's the way it is for a housewife with a half-life. Everything's the same. You're stuck in groundhog." "It can't be all that bad," Susan said, smiling. "I mean, there's small changes. For instance, yesterday I made roast chicken. Today we're having lasagna." "People always make that mistake. They think that a temporal loop means everything stays identical. But there's the question of entropy, chaos within a stable system. Just the mere fact you're disintegrating will distort the timeline. These tiny differences give the impression of change, but nothing really changes, does it? Can you even distinguish one day from the next?" Susan put down the teacup. There was a milky rim around the edge. She put her hand on the tea cosy to feel the pot. "No, you're right. Sometimes I don't even know what month it is. You wake up in the morning and the Christmas ads are playing on the radio and you say, 'No, that can't be.'" The fairy godfather nodded. "But hang on," Susan added. "You said time isn't moving. But the year is moving on. Winter follows autumn." "Yes, I know. Time isn't moving for you," he answered. Susan shook her head, blinking. "Now you've said it, there are all these things that have hit me. Why I miss people's birthdays, why I get ready to go out with the girls and then find out the night was arranged for 2 weeks ago. Why Nigel and I schedule conversations and they never happen. Well, yes, Nigel, that's a different matter. How do you mean? He actually exists most of the time in a parallel dimension to yours. He can only get back over at certain intervals. It's that ships that pass in the night phenomenon. Oh yes, sometimes we feel we never really see each other. That's because you never really do. Sometimes when he's here, do you feel he may as well not be, because he's not really responding, not really on your wavelength? That's because he's just bleeding through from the other dimension. He can only half hear you. He's trying his best, but there's so much interference that he can only pick up a fraction of the decibels and about half the meaning. Sometimes he says something back to you that makes no sense, as if he hasn't really been listening. Yes, said Susan. Now you know why. His energy is able to physically manifest in this dimension, but his full mental and emotional faculties cannot bridge the divide. He leaves some of them behind. She thought of Nigel, her husband, pale, pallor, thin, in his business suit, staring into space. Sometimes she waved a hand in front of his face and he didn't even see it. Gosh, she said, aligning the butter knife with a side plate. You know, Susan, this might be a lot for you to take in all at once, but if you have another cup of tea you might be okay. Most things around here are not what they seem.